Broadcasting from Millennium Student Center at the University of Missouri, St. Louis, and online at umslradio.org. We are the voice of UMSL. We are UMSL Radio.
The opinions expressed on this program are the views of the host and not necessarily the views of the University of Missouri St. Louis or this station.
What's up, everybody? Welcome to another installment of That Science and Nature Show. I'm your host, Jeremy Howard, and joining me this week, we have Becky Hanses-O'Neill.
How's it going?
Webster Heffern.
Hi, everybody.
And special guest, Dr. Tom Hagan.
Hi, it's nice to be here.
Tom, you're our first person with a PhD in the show. It's really nice. We have, more credibility now.
Wow, I feel honored, I suppose.
Yeah, or maybe also we got to, prove more things now because we have, more prestigious guests. But we're totally happy to have you on the show. You haven't been on the show, of course, before, and you are new to UMSL. Can you give a little intro of who are you?
Yeah, of course. I'll try and make a good example for the future PhDs. So my name's Dr. Thomas Hagan. Usually just go by Tom, but I did my PhD thesis at the University of Sydney. I work on invasive species, particularly invasive social insects, and I'm now studying paper wasps at the Miller Lab here at UMSL as my first postdoc, and I'm really rather excited about it.
Nice. Real quick for the audience, what is a postdoc? That's not a familiar term, many of us know.
Yeah, so it's a postdoctoral position, really. It's basically the next step after a PhD. The real big difference is that instead of, kind of doing research and hoping you get paid, you get paid. That's the big difference.
Yes, that is very nice.
Yeah, it's a real nice upgrade for sure.
Awesome. Well, we're excited to have you. We're going to do news as always and topic of the show, which is all about invasive species. So it's perfect that you're here for that.
Lovely.
And then outside of science, as we always do. Well, we'll get started with the news right away. So, Becky, I'm glad you're here. You got here in time because the first article I was heavily relying on you to be here for this.
Or say something about brains.
All right, so first article in the news today comes to us from Live Science. This is all about the brain potentially having a sort of tell, quote unquote, when it's recalling a false memory, as this study suggests. So scientists basically look at the hippocampus activity, which is responsible for memory in the brain, and they basically had these study participants go through and look at group categories of words. So they'd have them memorize a list of words, and then they introduce words later and see if they could recall them. And there were multiple lists. Some lists they were supposed to memorize, and others they were not supposed to memorize. And basically what they found is when words were sort of introduced in a similar context, like they're sitting in the same room, in the same sort of environment, they could falsely recall words they were not supposed to, thinking they were in fact true. And the big deal with this experiment is that they basically connected this to people who might have PTSD, kind of having false memories about what happened with their, whatever their traumatic event was, so on and so forth. So kind of a cool connection. What did we think overall about this study?
I thought it was pretty neat. I learned about false memories when I was growing up. This was a hot topic way back in the 90s when they first were discussing it. And the idea that they're finally finding out. I want to highlight this is very preliminary. They only did 2 different assays here. But the idea that they're finally finding some activity in the brain that's specifically associated with false memory recall, maybe we can all finally figure out which of our memories are false and which are true.
Do you feel like we have a lot of false memories as people walking around?
I wouldn't be surprised. The whole idea is you can't completely form a memory of a certain event, and so your brain takes cues from other things and kind of makes a mismatch. Becky can probably describe the phenomenon a little bit better.
Actually, that's not bad, what you were going for there. Yeah, our brains are very good at filling in the gaps, and the evidence is pretty strong that we have lots of false memories. And not that people are intentionally lying, it's just like in the radio station today, Webster's wearing a green shirt. If you ask me next week, I might say it was blue. It's more things like that.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember the article talks about if you have to remember things like in place and time, they can kind of impact if you have a false memory or not. I remember from Cognition, Becky, when we took that class with Dunlap 2 years ago, we talked about, I forget when we got to memory, there was some memory concept where you have to you can't remember everything because it's not useful. It's too much information. And sometimes old memories can conflate with newer, more important memories. The example being, where did I park my car? So on Tuesday, I parked my car in the parking garage. And then on Thursday, when I walk out, I start walking towards the parking garage only to realize, I parked my car in the street halfway to the parking garage. So I have to turn around and go back to the side street where I parked it. So that kind of memory conflates with it. So that was my thought when I was reading this article. I was like, yeah, I've done that a lot with my car where I don't remember where I put it. It's because you come here every day, it all just blends together. Other thoughts we have on brain memory stuff?
I went and read the article and the paper for this, and just as a quick aside, the opening sentence on this paper was just the most beautiful thing. I'll just read it. Humans possess the remarkable ability to mentally time travel and relive past events, which I just think is such a beautiful way of describing memory, right? And the idea that, like, you know, who knows, maybe if you're getting false memories, it's like you're going to a different timeline, right? Like, I don't know, it's just such a beautifully poetic way, and I wish, I feel like scientists could maybe write in this way a little bit more sometimes. It's a very nice way to put it.
I think that's pretty similar to the definition that was in our cognition textbook.
For mental time travel?
Yeah.
Yeah, I do remember that. Yeah, the idea that you can kind of transport yourself to other places and times when you think about it, which I just think is kind of cool conceptually that we have the ability to do that.
Yeah.
And I think there's a couple caveats I'd take with this study. One of them is the memory retrieval was a word memorization task with a distractor list of words. So like when they talked about the different categories and things, if you've ever had a neuropsychological evaluation, you've probably done this when you were doing your IQ test. So when, say, you're supposed to remember your list of flower names and you pick a wrong flower, whether you're in a different context or whatever, are they picking up changes that are associated with the false memory or of the person being uncertain about the word they're recalling? So I think there's a few caveats. Whenever we associate either blood flow from MRIs or electrical activity, in this case, with different parts of the brain is still a little bit of a black box. So we don't know if it's the false memory, or if it's uncertainty, if it's something else that's causing that brain change. And psychologists will sometimes call these light bright studies. They get some other criticisms for other reasons. So I would have a tiny grain of salt. And then I think the comment on PTSD that they quote in here is a little bit out of context. It's not about false memories of PTSD. It's recalling memories in incorrect and inappropriate places, which is going to be super upsetting if you have any kind of traumatic memory. So I think they were reaching a little bit on that part. Yeah. So these kind of cognition studies where the brain is sort of, we don't know how we're getting from point A to point B. I always take them with a little bit of skepticism.
I find it really interesting that you bring up the nuances of PTSD here, because the thing that stuck out to me was feels like this is a lot more related to things like Alzheimer's research, right? Where patients who have these memory issues are very likely to connect events in a way that's dissimilar from reality and just kind of see something that they can't remember properly, associate that with something that they've actually done that day and just assume the two events are linked. So I don't know, hopefully this research helps in that regard a little bit more than maybe some other areas as well.
That's interesting that you bring that up. I actually have a true memory of my grandmother doing that late in her life, just thinking that something she saw on the TV really happened and we were all there witnessing it.
Yeah, I've definitely seen family arguments, whether extended family or my own family, where two people have a different memory of something that happened in the past. And I'm sure y'all have seen this with your family too. I think people do this all the time, but unfortunately it seems like there's always one person that assumes the other is misremembering on purpose, or they're making it up.
Yeah, with my folks, as they're getting older, they'll bring up things like, oh yeah, don't you remember like so-and-so thing? And I'll be like, no, or I remember it differently. So like maybe we experienced this event in different ways, or we had different thoughts about it, which kind of form our memories about it, said events. But
well, we'll have all of you retell the story while you have EEG caps on, and we're going to see
who's lying.
Whose hippocampus is a little more uncertain.
Okay. Nice. All right, we're going to move on to the second article. This comes to us from Gizmodo, and I will admit, when I first saw this, I kind of thought this was like an April Fool's type joke. It seemed a little out there and weird, but this title for this news is, DARPA is a bit concerned about tactical puking attacks. So DARPA does a lot of research for the military who goes into combat, has combat scenarios, and they have these VR headsets that they're putting on to help with tactical combat training. And I guess there is the worry moving forward that people could potentially hack into these headsets and use them to either, I guess, manipulate or induce sickness into our, people who are serving in the military using these for training. It was kind of wild when I read this because I was like, it's not something I thought people would hack into. Like that's what we would go after for sort of military sabotage. But what do we think about that?
Well, are they using these for more than just training? If they are hacking targets?
To be honest, I'm not sure because I guess this is where I don't know anything about the military, so I don't feel like totally equipped to speak on this. But I'm not sure how having a VR headset in like a combat scenario would help because my immediate thought is it's like heavy, it's bulky, it might limit your visibility unless it's giving you lots of good additional information like you knew where your enemy combatants were or things like that. But I have no idea how sophisticated the tech is, which makes me think it's more just designed for training purposes to simulate a combat-like scenario, maybe.
Because I thought there was one comment in there where a soldier was. One of the testers noted the devices would have gotten us killed. So I believe they are eventually intended for combat use. So right now it's just training, but I think they are eventually intended for combat use, and that's why they would be hacking targets.
Well, and which headset were they using? It was from Microsoft, right?
Yeah. It's the HoloLens, military-grade HoloLens headset, which must have a lot of tweaks to it versus, the general public who consumes it for, media and games and stuff.
Yeah.
I don't know about that, but, maybe GPS. But, I mean, since it's mixed reality, yeah, I agree with you guys that the intent would be to use it in combat, because virtual reality, totally fake world. Mixed reality, you're getting real-time information. The original HoloLens is not, it doesn't completely cover your vision and replace everything you're seeing. It's adding to what you're seeing. Okay. So I think with mixed reality, that might be what they are going on here. So I was thinking this is like, when you're playing Halo and your Master Chief has a really good heads-up display, and whenever you turn, the rendezvous point or the target is over to your left.
Oh, okay.
So I could see some really good uses.
Okay, yeah, my mind did not think mixed reality when I read this. I was thinking more virtual reality. So, we have, a simulation you are in that you are sort of moving through with this headset. But this is, separate from the real world. Because I follow the games industry a little bit as a hobby. And I know with VR tech, it's still very, primitive and early. A lot of people complain about motion sickness and feeling like they want to throw up when they go into VR because you're now in this new scenario where your body is out of place of the real world, quote unquote, and it feels uneasy because it's I'm climbing this mountain in virtual reality, but I know I'm not actually on a mountain. I'm in my living room. I feel very sick now, so you want to take this headset off and get out of that because your brain is very confused about what is going on. So that was kind of where my mind went. But if it's more mixed reality, that makes more sense to me.
Yeah, and I'm zooming in on this picture of this headset that this guy has, and you can see his eyes through the goggle. So whatever he's got going on is obstructing his vision, but it's not, they're not piping in a video of the real world, I don't think.
Okay.
I think he can see.
That makes more sense.
Yeah. I'm wondering why they're choosing to induce puking as opposed to any other way that they could target the military with these devices. Couldn't you induce friendly fire by making somebody think that a friendly target were an enemy target? I feel like there are a lot of other ways that they could maybe target these devices, but now that Jeremy mentions that this is a common phenomenon with virtual reality, that you feel like puking, maybe this is just the easiest way to target these devices.
Yeah. I mean, I imagine the military, as soon as they start feeling symptoms, it's get this off of my face. That's probably the initial human response. It's I'm not going to keep wearing this if this is making me feel ill to complete the mission. You're going to, adjust as needed on the fly. So I'm sure they get a lot of feedback, the soldiers who test these out. That must be kind of fun, though, to test them. That's just my one thought. If you get to kind of practice a combat scenario with them. I think it sounds fun. I realize it's for a much more serious application, but it's a cool application.
Yeah, I do wonder what exactly is making them puke, since it is mixed reality. What information are they getting?
Yeah, I know the argument. The article alludes to just they're getting if it's hacked, they can be like bombarded with images. I don't exactly know like what those images would be. If it's just like, here's a bunch of strobe lights like flashing all over your face, or other sort of intrusive imagery that would kind of like induce, like an epileptic episode or something.
Oh, yeah, I don't know about you guys. I can make it about 10 minutes with a full VR headset, and then I start feeling pukey.
I have actually never tried VR. I'd like to, but it's a sort of a cost thing right now. VR is kind of expensive. It's more of a luxury item for the general consumer base.
Yeah. It's definitely one of those things that's hard to get your hands on, but I think we've all seen those videos of, say, people who are getting up there a little bit in age who maybe don't quite understand the technology all that well, and they're climbing a tower, and they act. If you take the floor out from under them, so to speak, they actually feel like they're falling. So I imagine there's like some genuine psychological reaction here that's maybe causing them to feel motion sick. It's maybe not just the perception, it's something hardwired into our brains. I'm not too confident to speak on it more than that, but it's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I mean, VR has a lot of... I mostly know about it from gaming, but VR has a lot of applications for potentially like education, or making people aware of issues or phenomenon. Like I remember hearing about like an early tech demo for VR that was about how basically like pigs and farm animals go from living to like on your plate. So it shows them like, here's the slaughterhouse, here's how that works, and like you experience that in VR. And I read online, people are like, this is the most horrifying thing ever, but it's also extremely enlightening because you have no idea how this concept works, and now you're exposed to it and actually like experience it.
Yeah, feeling a bit queasy as well.
Yes,
after that.
yeah.
So your eyes, when you move them left and right, they are like quite literally hooked up to your inner ear. There's reflexes that help you keep your balance. So I think when you put the VR headset on, and all of a sudden your visual input does not match any of the input your inner ear is getting, I think it's like seasickness.
Yeah,
that makes sense.
Yeah.
But yeah, lots of cool potential applications. Hopefully they can kind of iron this out and maybe make it a little more secure on a cyber attack level, so people aren't hacking into it.
You guys like sci-fi? Because I feel like this has been explored in Ghost in the Shell.
I have not seen Ghost in the Shell.
Yeah, this is a big Ghost in the Shell topic. It's also that one episode of Black Mirror, I believe, Men Against Fire. It reminded me of, a little bit scary. Yeah, this is out there already, right? This is a science fiction trope at this point, so it's interesting that they're exploring the space in real life.
Yeah. All right, we got to move on to our last article. So this comes to us from BBC News, and this is all about clothing waste. So title of this is The Hunt for a New Way to Tackle Clothing Waste. And basically the article starts out showing a large clothing dump in northern Chile, which apparently is so large it is in fact visible from space, which is pretty astronomical that we have that much clothing waste. It kind of then goes on to talk about how much clothing we throw away, and is even when we try to recycle things, that it ends up being waste anyway, and then kind of leads more into potential future directions for the fashion industry and new materials they might use that are less wasteful or can kind of be reused more. So I feel like, surprisingly, Webster and Becky, we didn't talk about clothing waste on the recycling episode, which now that like I read this, I'm like, oh, that would have been a great additional like addendum to what we talked about then. But yeah, I'm kind of surprised. Well, not that surprised, but like the clothing graveyard mountain thing was pretty eye-opening to me. I didn't know such things existed until I read this.
Yeah, I had no idea. I'd never thought of clothing waste. I definitely had those same thoughts, Jeremy, as I was reading this article. I was like, wow, I never had any idea clothing waste was such a big deal. But apparently it is. I thought this was cool because they're using microbes to modify the materials and make them more recyclable, and or to help with the recycling process. And I study microbes, so I'm like, oh, okay, more utility for my little babies.
Yeah, I know they talk about companies potentially using a new like corn fiber potentially for clothing articles, and then one thing they also mention is another company's looking into like mushroom fiber. So like in my head, it was like someone asks you like, oh, where'd you get that shirt? Is that cotton? It's like, oh no, actually it's mushroom. Like it's like real chic.
I love it.
So with clothing stuff, do you guys try to reuse or like sell, or what do you guys do with old clothing when it's kind of going away?
I kind of hoard it.
Yeah, I do as well. I never get rid of anything. I'm like, that has sentimental value to me because I wore it to this one event, this one time. Never getting rid of it ever. So I have like 3 closets full of clothing at this point because I haven't gotten rid of anything since 2006.
Okay. Yeah, I try to like allocate more junky like shirts and jeans to like this is like outdoor stuff, or like, you know, what I wear when I go into the field, or if I'm like, now that I'm working around the house. But if I do some kind of like dirty job, I have that for it. Also, and I didn't realize this was not something that like any of my friends or like surrounding families did, but when I was growing up, if we had like old junky clothing, we just like cut it up and like put it in like a rag bin, and that was like a rag bin for cleaning. Apparently nobody did this, because when my friends would come over, I'd be like washing the counter with like an old pair of like pajama pants or something that was like, you know, snipped up, and they're like, "What are you doing?" I'm like, "It's a rag." They're like, "That's literally a pair of pajama pants." I'm like, "But it's a rag." They're like, "Why are you just go get a sponge?" I'm like, "It's just fine. It's fine." But yeah, I got made fun of a lot by my friends in this high school, which I thought this was totally normal, but apparently this is not a normal thing to do.
Sounds like you were ahead of the game, Jeremy, on the recycle.
My parents, my dad is very green friendly. He works for EPA, so he's very like ahead of it on this.
I suddenly feel very vindicated. My family did the exact same thing.
Okay, nice.
Yeah,
all right, I'm not the only person who had
We
this.
used to tear up. We used to have a backyard garden and tear up old clothes as well to like help like tie trellises together.
Oh, yeah,
as
yeah,
well. So there's a lot of things that you can do to reuse clothes. This I don't know. I read this article and I was like, what's not to love, right? As someone who has recently moved country, there was unfortunately quite a lot of bagging of clothes and removing of clothes. We tried to donate as much as we could to charity, but unfortunately so much of it just kind of had to go in the trash. It wasn't in an acceptable condition to give away. So something like this is really promising to me. It would have made me feel a lot better at the time, about a couple of months ago when I was moving, for sure.
Yeah, the other eye-opening thing, I'm trying to find this sentence in the article. It talks about like greenhouse gas emissions, and that the fashion industry, it says the fashion industry is responsible for more annual greenhouse gas emissions than all international flights and maritime shipping combined. When I read that, I was like, what? That's crazy. I assumed all the travel and transportation would like rack up most of the greenhouse emission stuff outside of like factory production stuff. But I guess I didn't realize how much fashion contributed to global warming.
Well, actually, though, that might be an exaggeration, not in the sense that the comparison is false, but in the sense that international flights and maritime travel are not the major greenhouse emitters for travel. Driving your vehicle around is going to use a lot more, or is going to emit a lot more carbon than is taking an international flight.
Huh. Okay. Didn't know that.
Yeah, I've heard that statistic as well. I do think that, unfortunately, this article maybe is a little bit quiet about the elephant in the room, so to speak, which is the money and how well the business model might work out. Because unfortunately, it does come down to how much money this company might make off of this sort of thing. Things like I researched this as well. Bacteria that are actually capable of digesting nylon. They've existed since something like the mid-70s.
Oh.
So they've been out there for a long time, but we've just never really utilized them because it hasn't been monetarily efficient, I suppose. And there's that really sobering kind of bit right at the very end of the article where they say there are actually companies that allow you to return clothes in the hope that they get recycled in some way. And they another study followed through and tried to track where most of these clothes are going, and something like 75% of it was going straight into landfills. So, I don't know. Hopefully it works out.
Well, actually, it's still impressive, though, that even 25% were getting recycled. I mean, you were giving it back to this company in the hopes that it might get recycled. It's probably a better chance than anything else you might be able to do with it. So I think it's still worth it to try. I also want to... Regarding the money, I thought it was really interesting. One of these companies, I'm not sure if it was Lycra, they were introducing the recyclable material at first in a format that wasn't even recyclable yet. They're testing the market. They're actually trying this out. They're saying, okay, can we get this to a stage where people are willing to wear it? And then we're going to finally implement the totally recyclable version of the material.
Yeah, I thought that was really cool too.
Well, cool. All right, we got to get to topic of the show, so stay tuned. We'll be right back.
The UMSL Pre-Med Society is a student organization to help all pre-medical students explore their future endeavors. We host events all semester for students to indulge in the knowledge of medicine. Plenty of events are available for students to attend and familiarize themselves with their future career path, such as blood drives, spokespersons, speaking with medical students or residents, and more. The UMSL Pre-Med Society would help pre-med students at UMSL to explore their dream and engage with other individuals within the same field. Search Pre-Med Society on Try and Connect for more information.
And we're back. So now it's time for topic of the show. Topic of the show this week, which, Tom, we're glad you're here, is we're going to talk about invasive species. So this is more of an evergreen topic that I was kind of kicking around also for the first season. But as biologists, we interact with a lot of species. Many of them are invasive. They're not supposed to be here, per se. We have lots of insects and, just trying to think of other invasive species now, plants and so on and so forth, that we think are kind of part of our everyday life, but yeah, they're actually not originally from this country or your country of origin, in your case, Tom, Australia.
Yes.
So I guess I just want to kick off the conversation with, what do you think about invasive species? When you think about invasive species, what kind of things come to mind? And your experiences, where you grew up, where you visited, so on and so forth, what you heard about.
The first example I ever saw growing up was kudzu. We would drive down south. My mom's family was from Mississippi. And on the way, you'd see these forests that were just blanketed in this bright green vine. And I was like, Mom, that's so cool. What's that vine doing? She's like, oh, no, that's horrible. That's kudzu. That's killing the forest. I was like, oh, okay. So I don't know if you've ever seen this. I think we might have some on campus. I'm not sure. On the far west side of campus, you'll see some plants that are just blanketed in vine. And I'm not sure if that's kudzu, but that's kind of what kudzu looks like.
Yeah, my first experience was also kudzu, living in Kentucky when I was a kid. Now that I'm older, I probably have more interesting experiences, like cheatgrass in the western United States is a big problem because it changes fire regimes. But I'll toss this over to Tom, because I remember growing up watching wildlife documentaries about some very interesting invasive species cases in Australia.
Yeah, so it is worth noting that, I don't know if you can tell from the accent, I am Australian. And most of the cases that I'm familiar with are in the Australian context. The biggest one by far, and you can ask any child over the age of about 3 years old in Australia and they'll know this species, is the cane toad in Australia. This is definitely the one I was familiar with growing up. It's super invasive in far north Queensland in Australia. It's started spreading throughout the whole region now. It's into the Northern Territory, going out west. It's also coming down south, much further than you'd expect. It's a lot colder than toads normally like down there. But this is the classic example of invasive species in Australia. And yeah, I'm excited to talk more about it and other invasive species in Australia too. But that, at the very least, that's my childhood memory of invasive species, is the cane toad.
Yes, I don't remember a lot of invasive species as a child. I remember mostly learning with them in science classes and growing up, or in high school, college. Specifically, the cane toad, Tom, that you bring that up. Freshman year biology at my undergrad university, we watched a documentary on the cane toad in Australia. So as soon as I thought of invasive species, I thought about that, even though that's not from my childhood, per se. And the documentary was just talking about, they introduced them because of locusts, or was to manage some sort of agricultural thing, if I remember correctly.
Yeah, beetles. I feel a weird point of pride now that you bring it up. Yes, cane beetles was the reason they introduced them. So the story is pretty interesting. Apparently there was a Nature article published way back in the 1930s about how cane beetles were managed, cane sugar crops were saved by cane toads in, I believe, the Caribbean or the Philippines. I can't quite remember off the top of my head. And the Australian government went, this is excellent. We're having massive problems with cane beetles. Let's bring over these cane toads. And a couple of scientists went, let's do a study first, which is obviously an excellent idea. They brought them over into greenhouses. They set up a little study, and what they figured out pretty quickly is, in at least the Australian context, cane toads can't climb the cane sugar plants. And the cane beetles, when it's nice and warm in the Australian context, they hang out right at the top of the plant most of the time. So the cane toads didn't really do anything to help control the beetle population that much. So they went, it doesn't really work. That's fine. We'll just let them out and they'll perish in the wild. And unfortunately, that was not the case. And they number about something in the 2 million order. I think that was measured about 10 years ago now, so I'm sure it's even higher than that.
Yeah, I remember also in the documentary that people just don't like them so much over there that they had a clip of a man driving a van and there's a cane toad in the road on the opposite side of traffic and they just swerve over and run it over and then swerve back because they just don't like them that much.
Yeah, it is an unfortunate reality. I remember growing up with my grandparents in the car in Queensland and being like, why are we swerving over the road so much right now? I believe it used to be pretty common. The wildlife organizations have kind of stepped in now and said, hey, maybe that's not such a great idea. But things like cane toad golf were also a pretty common occurrence back when I was a kid, but not so much anymore.
Mm-hmm. So with invasive species and them, being kind of not where they're supposed to be, how do we feel about that as biologists? Is it just kind of like, okay, I got to deal with that? Or is it like, does that upset you in any way or give you a call to action, so to speak?
I'd be really interested in your two opinions before I give mine.
Sometimes it's a numbers game that you're not going to win. So I feel a little down about that. And also the animal welfare angle. If we have to euthanize a large number of animals or apply herbicides to plants, what can we do to minimize suffering while we do that? I get really frustrated with people releasing their pets into the wild. That makes me mad. And this idea that cats are allowed to have free roam of neighborhoods.
Yeah.
That's like billions of birds.
I will admit that is something that we used to do when I was in high school, and I know now we're not supposed to do that. So I will admit I was one of those people, or one of those families that were like, oh yeah, let's just let the cat out, we'll catch a bird. It's fine. That's how, it's nature. That's what they're supposed to do.
Except they're not supposed to be there.
Yeah, I am now aware of this.
So I have many mixed emotions and opinions about different things. I don't have a good general feeling about invasive.
I never really thought about the cat angle before, but whenever I hear about invasive species, being a microbiologist and formerly a virologist, I'm always thinking, what can we design? What pathogen can we design that's just going to take specifically this species out?
Love it.
I don't know if this has ever been tried. I'm sure it's been discussed plenty, but I don't know if it's ever been tried against any particular species. But I really think it would be an interesting angle to try someday.
Oh, my friend, I'm so glad to be here. Yes, it has. Myxomatosis in rabbits is the classic example in Australia. So rabbits are super invasive in Australia. They're a mammal that is not very good for the Australian habitat. They dig up the dirt. There's only a thin layer of topsoil in Australia that's very useful whatsoever. So when you dig up that dirt, it leads to a whole bunch of issues. Obviously, rabbits were introduced unfortunately by the British as a method of as a thing to hunt, I suppose, to eat as well, because they didn't really like the Australian fauna all that much. But about 30-40 years ago we started introducing a couple of viruses into the population. Myxomatosis was, I believe, the first one, and it really decimated the rabbit population, and then they bounced right back. Unfortunately, within a few years they developed resistance to it. So but there are definitely some cases, I believe, out there that have been wildly successful in comparison. But myxomatosis is the one that I know off the top of my head.
That's really cool. I definitely didn't know about that, and I'm definitely going to look that up and see if I can put my own brain to work. How will we prevent that from happening in the future? And look up some of the successful ones, of course, as well.
Yeah.
So, Tom, what are your feelings then? Because you wanted Becky and Webster to go first about their feelings about invasive species. What are your feelings on this?
Well, I'm really pleased that there was kind of a wide range of opinions there of both. Well, it's unfortunate that we have to get rid of them, and it's a numbers game, and sometimes we don't want to get rid of them, and maybe what are the specific cases that we can try and use to get rid of them when we can. I think invasive species are a fascinating topic. I think there's endless complexity in there, both in terms of the actual science and in terms of the morality of the thing. So I think it's worth noting that there's a little bit of a divide sometimes in invasive species literature. There's an idea of what is an invasive species. Sometimes it's defined as a species that only has negative impacts. Sometimes it's defined as a species that is just out there existing in a place that it shouldn't be. I find myself kind of existing in the second camp. But it's true that invasive species often really have a negative impact on native species, and particularly on human agriculture and infrastructure as well. Invasive species have a nasty habit of really messing up our farming systems, the buildings sometimes as well, just making a mess of things really. But it's also worth noting, on the other hand, that this is maybe not necessarily a new process. Right? So, at least in the Australian context, again, it's the thing I'm most used to. Something like dingoes, for example. I'm sure you all consider to be an Australian native species, right? I can see a shaking head and I can see some nodding heads as well. Yeah. So dingoes, the earliest evidence of dingoes in Australia, at least from fossils or bones that they found, is only about 3,500 years ago, right? Which is about a 20th of the time that people have been on the Australian continent, which is fascinating. It's wild, right? So in some respects, dingoes are an invasive species, right? But they serve a really important ecological function now in Australia because they outcompeted many of the native species who serve the same purpose. And going even further back, things like lions, zebras, giraffes, hippos, all of those species that you maybe associate in the African context, they only appeared in Africa about 2 million years ago. Up until that point, most of Africa, most of their mammalian species were more related to things like elephants and shrews than anything else. So this process of species moving into new locations and displacing the species that currently live there, this has been going on for basically since the dawn of life. I suppose the main difference now is just the sheer rate and scale at which it's happening, mostly through human-mediated processes. But I do think it's important to note that just because the species is there in a different location, it doesn't necessarily mean that that's a bad thing. There's a lot of nuance there.
Yeah, when I was writing this prompt, the one thing I was thinking about, and this is a little more of a historical perspective, is in world history class when I was 16, I think, we had to, we had to because it was for school, but we watched a documentary called Guns, Germs, and Steel from Jared Diamond, who basically has this theory about the world that those in power are in power for three specific reasons. One, they have access to guns, so they are able to overcome their enemies through, military means. Two, steel, they're able to have infrastructure and basically build things and establish cities, and agriculture kind of is lumped in there as well. And then three, they had germs, so biological weapons to overtake their enemies sort of silently without having to just conquer them on a military level. So those three things, from this person's perspective, he kind of hypothesizes this is why the world is as it is, because if you had those three things on your side, you were able to be successful. So the germs aspect is where I was thinking about when I was writing this, because a lot of times the Europeans brought over germs to America and South America, and they just wiped out entire tribes of Native Americans. So I was like, all right, that's in a way an invasive species that we didn't really conceptually understand until much, much later. So.
Yeah, 100%. Those sort of diseases, I think, are fascinating case studies of invasive species as well. There's a lot of them that there's some that we can bring up later as well that are maybe examples of biological control, which are maybe actually good examples of invasive species in different contexts.
So as we're getting close to the end of the topic of the show, are invasive species always bad? Is there any good that can come out of them? And maybe, I guess you can interpret the word good as you will, whatever good you think that might be, whether that's for humans or for the environment or for anything, or maybe there is no good, they're just all bad.
I think there's some cases in agriculture of using things like parasitoid wasps that are so host specific that they can't really run amok like a cane toad. So I think there are some good examples, but there's some very specific conditions that need to be met.
Okay.
Yeah, I have two kind of broad examples, I suppose, and the parasitoid one is an excellent thing to bring up. So, again, Australian context here. One of the actual reasons, one of the reasons that the Australian government thought it might be a good idea to bring over cane toads in the first place is because they already had a hugely successful biological control program in action. So there was this other invasive species, the invasive prickly pear cactus. It's this fascinating species. Again, it actually can be cultivated and eaten, but it kind of spread all throughout Australia, loved the climate, and you can imagine as a cactus, if it was spreading everywhere, it's this huge, massive clump of spikiness, which is bad for people's gardens. It's bad for natural areas where native species are trying to survive, especially your big macropods, your big mammals. So they thought to themselves, how are we going to get rid of this? We need to deal with this problem somehow. And they brought over this thing called the Argentinian moth, which is another example of a highly specific organism that predated just on the prickly pear. And it was so successful that the population bounced back to something like 10% of its maximum size. So things that can be highly specific in what they're doing, sometimes they can be really good invasive species. Another one that I love to bring up is mustangs here in the US. So the horse, not the car. So interestingly, horses evolved in North America. They didn't evolve in Eurasia as some people might expect. And the more recent horse families moved to Europe and Asia within the last 500,000 years or so. About 10,000 years ago, horses disappeared from North America, be it through competition, be it through hunting, be it through climate change, probably through numerous factors. But we've reintroduced horses, maybe accidentally, into the North American continent. And they're perhaps serving the exact same role that their cousin ancestors were in North America maybe 10,000 years ago. Now, there's a lot of debate about that, about what role exactly they're serving, whether the environment has moved on, so to speak, since their ancestor cousins were last here. But it's definitely interesting to think about how we might have accidentally introduced something that we might have unfortunately got rid of from the context.
Yeah.
I'd add a note in the Western United States that as wild horses become overpopulated, because horse per acre that can be supported in something like sagebrush steppe is quite low, the Bureau of Land Management will do roundups and adopt out these horses to the public so they don't overpopulate and starve to death. And there's lots of research on birth control for them. So it's definitely controversial. And in Australia, what do you have? You have brumbies?
Yeah, we do. We do.
So that's a really fascinating one because we've also got rid of our big grazers, the bison, here in the United States and replaced them with cattle, now our wild horses. But do they graze exactly the same? It's really a fascinating subject.
Yeah, exactly. And it's really highly context specific as well, which I think is a key takeaway for invasive species. So as you said, in the case of the mustangs, if they get really high population sizes, that's actually bad for them, bad for the environment in some ways. And it's maybe because we've accidentally got rid of most of their predators as well.
Exactly.
And in the Australian context, the brumbies are causing massive damage to native areas as well. They dig up that topsoil. Like I've said before, there's not much of it. And when you dig it up, it can cause severe ramifications to the environment. So, yeah, it's really highly context specific is one of the big takeaways, I think, for invasive species.
Yeah, and I like something that you said earlier, that speciation, replacement of species, this kind of thing is perfectly natural on different timescales. So I think trying to quote-unquote restore a habitat or an ecosystem once it's had invasive species is maybe not the right way to think about it. It's more like, what ecosystem services do we want from this area, and how are invasive species affecting that?
Exactly.
So
100%.
All right, so we're actually out of time for our topic of the show, so I got to jump to our last segment. But we'll be right back with Outside of Science. Stay tuned.
The Women and Gender Minorities in Philosophy organization is hosting our meeting at 12 p.m. in the Quad on October 18th. This event is open to faculty, staff, graduate students, majors, minors, and all interested parties. Come, bring your lunch, catch up, and hang out. We'll see you there.
And we're back. So it's time for our last segment of the show, Outside of Science, where, as you guessed it, we talk about things outside of science. This is our off-the-cuff segment where we just talk about whatever to prove we're not robots that do science all the time. So does anyone want to share anything they've been up to the last week?
My family were visiting from California. My brother and his wife and their daughter, who is 2 years old, and they have a new one on the way. So that was really exciting. I got to do my weekly cooking, only this time for an entire family.
Nice.
Yeah,
Nice.
I made halibut for the first time, which was phenomenal. It was really good.
Nice.
I have a good recipe if anybody wants one.
Very cool. Becky or Tom, you've...
Still doing Inktober, still working on. I'm up to a size 8 on my ear stretching on my gauges. So.
Okay.
Lovely.
Your ears adjusting okay?
Yeah, I'm going really slow.
Okay.
Like, if it hurts, I'd stop doing that.
That's usually a good medical tip in general.
Yeah, I've been doing loads of field work recently, trying to get wasps from around the St. Louis area, and it's given me a real good opportunity as an immigrant, so to speak, to go out and try the local cuisine, the local delicacies. So I'm working my way through. I've had got like a little list. I've had the fried green tomatoes. That's not something I can get in Australia. I've had St. Louis barbecue, which is very luxurious.
Have you imbibed have you tried the toasted ravioli yet?
I'm working my way up.
Okay.
I'm getting there. It's a little scary, I have to say,
Okay.
but I'm really enjoying myself. So yeah, it's been lovely being here.
That's awesome. Yeah, if you have any good places you eat food at, because I don't eat out that much, to be honest, just like hit me up, be like, yo, check out this place, and I'll check it out later, even if I'm not from here, but I've been here for a little while.
I'll have to get my list up, and I'll have to get that recipe from you later as well.
Absolutely.
I've actually had a pretty busy weekend, so I did 2 things this weekend. One, I ran the UMSL Alumni 5K, which I'm not an alumni, but I've been trying to get into running this year because I had this 30 under 30 list, and I want to run a 5K before I turn 30. I did the race to the tracks in the zoo back in May, and I turned 30 in June. So I was like, and I did field work all summer, so I didn't do any running. I just walking and hiking. And I was like, all right, I want to try to get back into running again. So I did a little more running last month or so. I was like, all right, we'll try a 5K again. So I did that on Saturday. That was a lot of fun. It was a great turnout, and it also had the proceeds went to, I forget the name of the organization, but they go to adults with intellectual disabilities. So it was a good cause overall. So I was happy to do that. And then Saturday night, I went to an Owl City concert. Owl City is my favorite group of all, well, it's like one person, but my favorite artist of all time. Had a really great time. Something I didn't realize that could happen from concerts, because this is only the second concert in my life I've been to, is apparently post-concert depression is a real thing.
Oh, yeah.
That you can experience. I was like, because I was really sad on Sunday. Not really sad, like a little sad on Sunday. And I was like, all right, maybe it's like Sunday scaries, because like the week's coming up and all that. And it was like, it went away. So I was like, all right, this is fine. And then Monday I was like really sad. We were in lab meeting, Becky. I was just like, this all feels so pointless and mundane. I hate this. And then I was like starting to like, I went grocery shopping. I was like sobbing a little bit. I'm like, Jeremy, what is happening? So I like Googled my symptoms, and I was like, do people get really sad after concerts? And everyone was like, yes, this is a very normal phenomenon. Where if you have a great time at a concert and it's like, you know, a great artist, you meet a lot of great people, your endorphins are like through the roof because you're having such a good high, like a natural high of sorts. And then you come back down to normal life. Like that is a huge crash for your brain. So you actually get depressed. I did not know this was a thing. So I've experienced this over the past 48 hours. I'm much better now, but yesterday I was not doing so hot. But I did have a really good time. Owl City's amazing. And now I want to go to more concerts, because I went to one when I was in college and it was not good. So I was like, oh, concerts are just not for me. And then I went to this one, and it was amazing. So now I was like, I want to go to more concerts.
I do love that you've described, I feel really terrible after the last 2 days. It's just been, I've not been feeling too good. I really want to go to more concerts, though.
Maybe they won't be quite as emotional as Owl City, since that was your favorite.
That's true. I mean, I did look at remedies online, and one of the top ones is like, plan your next concert. I feel like that's like a gateway drug there. It's like let's just keep doing the thing that made you sad.
There's some good ones coming up.
Yeah, I'll have to be on the lookout. But then the other thought was like, remember, Jeremy, you're still a grad student. You got to rein it in. You can't just be dropping money on concerts left and right. So got to be a little more strategic about this. But yeah, I had a good weekend. That was a lot of fun. All right. I think with that, we're going to wrap up now that I've talked about all of that. So thank you very much for listening this week. Thank you to Becky, thank you to Webster, and thank you to you, Tom, our special guest, for coming on the show and talking all about invasive species stuff. It was lovely to have you.
Thank you for having me. It's been wonderful to be here.
Yeah. If you want to come back on the show, you're welcome anytime. But until then, you can listen to us on Tuesday mornings on UMSL Radio or online after the podcast goes up on either Spotify, Google Podcast, or Amazon Music. Until then, you've been listening to That Science and Nature Show. My name is Jeremy Howard, and we are out.